Hi everybody, welcome back to Icelandic for Foreigners. In this video we're going to be talking about the middle voice, which is a feature of Icelandic which it gives it a little bit of spice, makes it kind of unique. This feature is found in other languages, but it's just one of those things to make learning Icelandic a little bit more interesting, as if it weren't already hard enough. But actually, the middle voice, it's a fun topic, and I hope you enjoy it. So what exactly is the middle voice? Well, it's a verb form that changes the meaning of the verb. Often it changes it in a predictable way, but sometimes in an unpredictable way. You've probably seen it before. It's formed by adding an st to the end of the verb. And sometimes there are a few other changes. I'm not really going to talk about the specific inflections in this video. They're relatively straightforward. Maybe I'll do that in another video. But in this video, we're really just going to be talking about the meaning. So there are several different meanings that are predictable, particularly these first three. A lot of the time, the middle voice can create a similar meaning as the passive voice. Sometimes it can give the verb a reflexive meaning, or it can convey reciprocity. And then sometimes the meaning can just completely change when you use the middle voice. And so we're going to look at some examples of each of these. I do want to start with a warning, though. The middle voice, it can't actually really be used for every verb. And because it's unpredictable, you can't just decide to use it, and it won't always mean the thing that you want it to mean. And sometimes it won't mean anything at all. So you don't really get to create your new usages. And I mean, you can, but it'll often sound strange to an Icelander if that's not a way that if that's not a verb that they typically use the middle voice for, or if you try and use it in a different way. So you do kind of have to learn on a verb by verb basis how the middle voice is going to work. So let's look at that first meaning that the middle voice can often convey. And that first one is that it can often be very similar to passive voice. Passive voice is when the object of a verb becomes the subject. And I'll show you an example to make that simpler. So the verb drepa means to kill. So here is a sentence in what is called the active voice. This is just the regular usage of the verb where you have a subject and an object. Ræningin drap gjaldkeran means the robber killed the clerk. So we have a subject, ræningin, and we have the object, gjaldkeran. Now, the passive voice, which we're going to use the middle voice to convey, is like in this example. Sjómaðurinn drapst í öldunum means the sailor was killed in the waves. So when we use drepa in the middle voice, drepast, it means to be killed and not to kill. So in this case, sjómaðurinn is the person that died, but he is also the subject of the sentence. We're using the middle voice to convey a passive voice, to be killed. Here's another example. Að sjá means to see. So here's an active voice example. Sigrún sá frænda sinn í búðinni í gær means Sigrún saw her uncle in the store yesterday. So here is a form with the middle voice. Fræga leikkonan sást á kaffihúsinu. The famous actress was seen in the cafe. So look out for that passive voice. It's a common meaning for the middle voice. But look at this next example, að borða. You would think that saying að borðast would mean to be eaten, but that isn't actually the case. Að borða can't really be used in the middle voice, at least not in modern speech. It would be pretty strange to hear. So this example, pizzan borðaðist á 5 mínútum, it doesn't mean the pizza was eaten in 5 minutes. In fact, it really doesn't make any sense at all. So that just goes back to my point that you don't get to just throw st on the end of any verb and expect it to work. Sometimes you can predict it and you'll predict it correctly, but you do kind of have to be careful because sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And borda is a good example of that. All right, let's look at the next meaning, reflexivity. A reflexive verb is when the subject and the object are the same. So let's look at an example. Að klæða means to dress. For example, here's an active voice example. Hún klæddi barnið í náttfötin means she dressed the child in pajamas. So we have a subject, hún, and a child, and an object, barnið. Now, here is an example with the middle voice, and it's used in a reflexive sense. Hún klæddist pilsi og blúsu. She dressed herself in a skirt and blouse. So the subject is she, and the object is she or her. And this is conveyed using the middle voice. A lot of the time when the middle voice can be used in a reflexive meaning, we could also use the reflexive pronoun. For example, you could also say hún klæddi sig í pils og blúsu. She dressed herself in a skirt and blouse. That would also work. But it is common to see the reflexive form in the middle voice. And you'll notice here that we are using the dative form of pils and blúsa, which is pretty common with reflexive verbs. When the reflexive is formed with the middle voice, especially when it still takes an object like this one. All right, here's another example of a reflexive example. Setja means to set. Hann setti tuskuna á borðið. He set the rag on the table. This is an active voice example, but here is a reflexive example. Hann settist við hliðina á henni. He sat down at her side. So in this case, we're saying he set himself down at her side. This is the way to say to sit down. All right, let's go to the next meaning, which is reciprocity or reciprocal. This is when two subjects or more are doing the action to each other. So we'll look at an example. Að berja means to hit. And here's an example in the active voice. Hann ber að dyrum. He knocks on the door. Now here's an example with the middle voice. Þeir berjast í skólagarðinum means they fight in the schoolyard. This means they fight each other. So the subject is þeir, and it's also the object, but it's just multiple subjects, right? Multiple people are doing this action to each other. Here's another example. Að hitta means to meet. Siggi hitti vin sinn niður í bæ. Siggi met his friend downtown. Now let's look at a reciprocal version. Þeir hittust á sunnudaginn means they met on Sunday. They met each other. So this is a very common meaning of the middle voice is sort of reciprocal sense that subjects are doing it to each other. One more I wanted to look at because this one's kind of, it shows a different aspect of the middle voice. Að tala við means to talk with. For example, hún talar oft við mömmu sína. She talks with her mother often. Now, if we want to do the middle voice with this and have the reciprocal effect, we need to keep the preposition. So in this example, þær talast við flesta daga. They talk most days, or they talk together most days. If we want to use it in this form, we have to keep við here because you don't talk someone, you talk with someone. So you need to keep the preposition. You could also say þær tala saman flesta daga. That would be the same meaning. But if you want to use the middle voice in this example, you need to make sure you keep við. All right, let's talk about the last meaning, which is when we have a complete change in meaning by using the middle voice. For example, að fara means to go, but að farast means to perish or to die. So in this example, margir farast í óveðrinu, many are dying in the storm. So in this case, fara and farast, they don't actually have a very similar meaning, do they? You know, one means to go, the other means to die. They're not very related. And so you need to look out for that. Sometimes the meaning just completely changes when we use the middle voice. And that's why you don't want to guess too much about the middle voice because it could completely change what you're trying to say. Að láta means to let, and að látast, again, means to die or pass away. Ragnheiður lést í nótt means Ragnheiður passed away last night. Let's look at one more example. Taka, to take. The middle voice, takast, means to succeed in or be successful at something. So þeim tókst að sleppa frá lögreglunni means they managed to escape the police, or they succeeded in escaping the police. So this is just another example where the meaning completely changes when we use the middle voice. I want to look at this example real quick because it's also important to recognize that sometimes there is no real active voice that's used in Icelandic for a given verb, and you can only use it in middle voice. For example, að skjáttlast means to be mistaken about something, And you never really use the verb skjáttla without the middle voice. You just always use skjáttlast. So here's an example of a sentence. Mér skjáttlast aldrei fólk means I'm never wrong about people. So it's just important to realize that you may come across some verbs that only exist in the middle voice, and you can't really use the active voice at all. If you think of any more examples of this, please feel free to drop a comment below so that we can all see some more examples. Anyway, I hope that this lesson was helpful. Please feel free to leave questions and comments below, and I'll try to get to them. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.